Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you joining us. We have people joining us from all across North America, as well as a few from Israel and even one person from Brazil. So we're just delighted to have you here joining us. Um, and I'm just going to give a moment for everyone to get into the Zoom room. I see we have 59 people joining us so far. And then we will begin the webinar. Okay. So on behalf of Rabbi Lynn Greenoff and the board of Kolot Mayim Reform Temple, I'd like to welcome you to our first lecture in our Building Bridges speaker series. Our theme this year is Kolot Zimmerit, the many voices of Jewish music. We're so glad you could join us today. My name is Marilyn Wolovic, and I'm the chair of Kolot Mayim's Adult Education Committee, and I'm also a member of the Kolot Mayim congregation. And I'm so grateful to have found such a nurturing and welcoming community of support. This talk is being offered with funding support from the Jewish Federation of Victoria and Vancouver Island. And I just want to begin by acknowledging that I am on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich nations. I'm the granddaughter of Eastern European Jewish immigrants who came to find safety here in Canada, and I'm grateful for that. Our theme for Building Bridges, as I've said, is Kolot Zimmerit, the many voices of Jewish music. In the wake of the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism following the events of October 7th, it is more important than ever to celebrate and amplify the rich tapestry of our Jewish culture, history, and heritage. This series of lectures will explore the profound role of music in shaping and sustaining Jewish identity across generations and around the world. We aim to provide a unique forum to delve into the diverse expressions of Jewish music, its histories, traditions, and its cultural, religious, and secular themes. Music has always been a source of strength, resilience, and hope for the Jewish people, and this series will highlight its power to unite communities and inspire pride in our shared heritage. Before we get started and I turn things over to our featured guest, Dr. Lori Shen, I will briefly explain our Zoom webinar format. The event is being recorded and will be sent to everyone who registered. Dr. Shen will speak for about 50 minutes on the topic of classical echoes in Ladino, Sephardic songs reimagined. Following her presentation, we will have a 15-minute Q&A at around noon. So you can enter your questions in the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen. Please keep your questions short and ask in the form of a question rather than a statement. Closed captioning is available for those who need it. So, Sam, could you please spotlight Dr. Lori Shen? Thank you. Welcome. So today I am so pleased to welcome our first special guest, Dr. Lori Shen. Turkish Mezzo soprano and Fulbright alumna, Dr. Lori Shen is acclaimed for her versatility across opera, art song, musical theater, and jazz, with performances in Turkey, Europe, and the United States. Alongside her dynamic performing career, Lori is deeply committed to teaching and research, specializing in vocal literature, pedagogy, and voice science. With a background in physics, she uniquely bridges art and science to explore the singing voice. A dual citizen of Turkey and Spain, Lori brings a rich multicultural perspective to her pioneering research on Sephardic art song. Dr. Shen is internationally recognized for her groundbreaking work on including the first catalog of classical settings of Sephardic folk melodies and a pioneering Ladino diction guide for singers. Since 2018, Lori has shared this repertoire worldwide through recitals and lectures. She earned her Doctor of Musical Arts from the University of Maryland and currently serves as Assistant Professor of Vocal Pedagogy at Shenandoah University and is on the faculty at the Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University. So now, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Lori Shen.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Let me share my screen and then I will take it from there. Okay. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to my lecture entitled Classical Echoes in Ladino, Sephardic Songs Reimagined. First of all, I would like to thank the Kolot Mayim Reform Temple, but especially Marilyn Wolowick, for organizing this wonderful speaker series that introduces many voices of Jewish music. I'm thrilled to be a part of the Building Bridges speaker series and to have the opportunity to share my research with you today. This talk is especially meaningful to me as it reflects a journey that began about 8 or 9 years ago with my doctoral dissertation in voice performance. What started as an academic project has since grown into a broader exploration and celebration of a rich and underrepresented genre within the Western classical tradition, Sephardic art song. The repertoire I will talk about today is certainly unique, but I also find it to be invaluable for the preservation of an important culture, a dying language, and a beautiful musical tradition that offers a variety of flavors. I would like to begin with some background information pertinent to the music you will learn about today. I will talk about the Sephardim, their history, language, and culture briefly. Hopefully this will set the scene, and then I will discuss the characteristics and stylistic elements of traditional Sephardic music. Finally, I will introduce you to the Western classical arrangements of Sephardic folk songs for voice and various instruments, and I will talk about the development of the Sephardic art song genre. And of course, we will also listen to excerpts from some Sephardic art songs together. Okay, let's begin. Sephardim are commonly known as the Jewish people who trace their ancestry back to the Iberian Peninsula, specifically to the Jews that were expelled from Spain in 1492 due to the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was established by King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile to achieve religious unity in the country. So they gave the Muslim Moors and Jews of Spain only two choices: convert to Catholicism or leave. As a result, few of them did convert to Catholicism to avoid persecution, but the larger population decided to leave. About 300,000 Jews from Spain went into exile in different directions: Portugal, from where they were expelled shortly after, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean basin, including the Ottoman Empire at the time, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. So the Sephardic culture spread to Greece, Turkey, North Africa, Palestine, Amsterdam, and Livorno, as the Sephardim migrated to these areas following the Spanish expulsion. These people did not get to take many of their possessions with them as they were forced to leave, but they did carry with them the 15th century Spanish language, from which would emerge the Ladino language, which we will talk about later. But they also carried with them their culture, especially their oral literature comprising poems, tales, or romances, which are essentially poems turned into songs, expressing the pain of being exiled and the nostalgia for their former homeland. Now, what exactly is the Sephardic culture? Although the word Sephardim comes from Sefarad, which means Spain in medieval Hebrew, the term has a much broader meaning. As Haim Henry Toledano states in his book, The Sephardic Legacy, Sephardic tradition is a system of values, institutions, ethnic traits, and attitudes that originated in North Africa and the Middle East and evolved among Jews living within the orbit of the Islamic world in these areas, beginning in the early Middle Ages, before it arrived in the Iberian Peninsula. Therefore, it would be wrong to assume that the Sephardic culture is merely a fusion of Spanish and Jewish cultures. I think in order to have a better understanding of the Sephardic culture, we must discuss what a diaspora is. The word diaspora comes from Greek, meaning scattering and dispersion. In his article, Jewish Music and Diaspora, Edwin Seroussi states that diaspora is referred in Greek antiquity to a population of a specific geographical origin that became scattered throughout a wider area. And in the past half-century, diaspora was adopted to describe every possible physical or imagined, voluntary or forced displacement of individuals or communities from their real or imaginary homeland for multiple reasons. It could be political, economic, racial, religious, etc. He later adds that diaspora is most effective as an explanatory tool when applied to the existence of an identified population that feels that it is away from its homeland, however imagined, however distant in time and space, and more subtly, that it involves more than demographics. Some sort of consciousness of separation, a gap, a disjuncture must be present. So the Jewish populations in Europe, North Africa, and the Arab and Persian Near East in the early medieval period were already diasporic populations. The forced and voluntary migrations from these locations later on created further displacements, of course. The expulsion of Jews from Spain and later Portugal resulted in a classic example of a second stage displacement that sometimes generated an overemphasized longing for a lost homeland. And music became the field of cultural expression in which diaspora had one of its strongest showings against this rhetorical negation. So, because of this, to have a better understanding of the Sephardic culture, we must keep in mind that Sephardim are a diasporic population and consider all of the cultural exchange that took place between them and their surrounding cultures in their journey. This cultural exchange is most evident in their language. As I mentioned earlier, the Jews expelled from Spain carried with them their most precious belonging, the 15th century Spanish language. This language of the Sephardim can be referred to as Ladino, Judeo-Espanol, or Judaismo. Ladino is essentially 14th and 15th century Castilian, with contributions from Gallego-Portuguese, Catalan, Valencian, Aragonese, Hebrew, Turkish, Arabic, and other languages such as Greek, French, Italian, and Balkan languages. Surprisingly, the presence of Hebrew in Ladino is in fact very little. However, strong traces of Turkish, French, Italian, and Greek can be found in Ladino, as the Sephardim did not live self-sufficiently in their own state. They may have had quarters in the large towns they settled in, but they were never the only inhabitants of those towns. And here's an interesting fact. It was at the end of the 19th century that Castilian Spanish was discovered by the Jews and Judeo-Spanish by the Spaniards. It is crucial to point out that Judeo-Spanish is not a series of juxtapositions of all of these languages mentioned, but it is a complex code, one of whose constituent parts is multilingualism and the play on languages. A certain linguistic creativity is inherent to Judeo-Spanish, which has even been used as a vehicle for expressing verbal revenge through humor in an oppressive society. Here's an example from Marie-Christine Varol's book. Dr. Maimonides is apparently what one says to someone who poses and claims to be smart. Have you heard of this name before? Maimonides? He is also known as Rambam, and he was a 12th century philosopher from Cordoba, and apparently also one of the greatest Jewish scholars of all times. So it makes sense, right? If someone calls you Dr. Maimonides, they think you're very smart. In fact, that's wrong, and here's why. In Turkish, Maymun means monkey, and the Greek Idis is how the Greeks of the Black Sea area form family names, which means that that person is in fact calling you a monkey, and a Greek one too. I would like to quote Varol here. Irony, distance, puns, and endless plays on meanings and stylistic nuances bouncing back and forth make this language of quotations, double entendres, discrete jokes that seem undecipherable, of implied and overly clear meanings, into an original and eternally renewed linguistic system, steeped in a devastating sense of humor that can only be achieved through a knowledge of several languages, a knowledge that gives its strength, its richness, and its freedom. The areas in which Ladino was spoken went beyond the lands of the Ottoman Empire, where the Sephardim were accepted in great numbers under the ruling of Sultan Bayezid II, around the time of expulsion from Spain. According to Varol, there was a Judeo-Spanish community in Bucharest and another in Vienna that saw a considerable development in the 19th century. Vienna even became one of the principal publishing centers of Judeo-Spanish at the beginning of the 20th century. Finally, France, North and South America became an emigration pole for the Spanish Jews between the two world wars. After the Second World War, nothing was left of the prestigious community of Thessaloniki, and the communities of Yugoslavia, Greece, France, Austria, and Romania were decimated. The Bulgarian community managed to emigrate mainly to Palestine, and the Turkish community was preserved. Today, Judeo-Spanish is spoken sporadically in large European and American cities, and in a more consistent way in Turkey, in Istanbul and in Izmir, and in Israel. Nowadays, Ladino has come to refer to the more corrupt Judeo-Spanish vernacular, spoken mainly by the Sephardim of the Eastern Mediterranean. I have a few slides here on Ladino lyric diction, just to quickly skim through. You may use the QR code on the screen to get to these tables I'm going to show you. And for those who are not familiar with the term lyric diction is the art of clear and expressive pronunciation in singing. It ensures that the words are understandable and that the natural sounds and character of the language are preserved within the music. So Ladino is considered a Romance language. However, it was initially written in Hebrew and Arabic characters, and therefore there's a lack of uniformity in the transcriptions of Ladino into Latin characters. Due to the differences in consonant and vowel sounds between Ladino and modern Spanish, Ladino and Hebrew, and Ladino and Arabic, the consonant and vowel sounds in Ladino were transcribed differently by scholars depending on their own native languages. For example, the sound P could be written with a C, a Q, a K, or CH, depending on the person transcribing it. So each Sephardic community spells and pronounces Ladino in their own way, and that makes the lyric diction a bit complicated. However, the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, guide I'm sharing with you through these tables should be helpful for those who would like to sing Sephardic songs in Ladino. So where's the Sephardim today? Today, the 2.2 million Sephardim scattered all around the world includes the Ladino-speaking Sephardim of Turkey and other Balkan countries, the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardim of Amsterdam, London, and New York, and other US cities, the Middle East Sephardim of Egypt, Iraq, and Syria, and the Sephardim of North Africa, as well as Latin America. Over 5 centuries of migration after their expulsion from Spain, the Sephardim spread across the globe, enriching their culture, language, and folk traditions. As they settled in new lands, they integrated into broader communities, adopting local languages and customs. Especially today, it is rather challenging to define Sephardism from an ethnical, geographical, or linguistic point of view. The most meaningful definition is a cultural one. Sephardim are now understood as Jews who trace their ancestry to any of the major historical centers of the Sephardic life and tradition, and who share and cherish the Sephardic tradition and heritage as it was transmitted from one generation to another. What is especially striking is how a distinctly Spanish element within the Sephardic identity persisted long after any connection to Spain did. In her book, in her book, The Jews of Spain, Jane Gerber illustrates this beautifully. How strange it seems that Sephardim scattered in Turkey and Bulgaria, Curaçao and Pernambuco sang ballads about medieval Spanish knights and maidens in their medieval Spanish language, Ladino. Throughout the Turkish-speaking world, the conversation of Sephardic Jews especially women, would be peppered with Spanish proverbs. The classical genres of Spanish oral literature would be preserved for centuries in the Balkans in romances, as each important life cycle event was marked by Jewish festivities rich in Spanish song. Today, even though the 2.2 million Sephardim are spread across the globe, it's still possible to speak of a distinct Sephardic culture, enduring traditions, and the unique language of Ladino. The rich body of folk literature, including traditional songs, continues to reflect their long, dynamic history shaped by centuries of cultural exchange. To quote scholars Samuel Armistead and colleagues, the folk song tradition of Sephardim is both medieval and modern, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic, Hispanic, but also Balkan and Near Eastern, and indeed French and Italian as well. For all its seeming conservatism, the Sephardic song tradition is a vital, dynamic, creative phenomenon, forever involved in the ongoing process of becoming something different from what it was before. Which brings us to the music. The secular Sephardic song repertoire consists of a few categories. These genres are defined based on musical parameters, such as structure, melody, and rhythm, and also based on the text and the relationship between the music and text. Some of these songs were passed down orally through generations, making their origins difficult to trace. Others are Ladino translations or adaptations of Turkish, French, and Balkan songs, incorporating dance rhythms like tango and foxtrot, and sometimes even quoting familiar operettas or zarzuelas. Since this repertoire represents such a wide range of cultural exchange, the musical analyses of them require vast musical knowledge. Sephardic music possesses elements of Western classical music of all periods, starting from medieval, Spanish, Moroccan, Balkan, and Greek musical traditions, and Turkish folk and classical forms, including makam. Makam is the Middle Eastern modal practice with more pitches than we're used to in our Western 12-tone notation system. This modal system, makam, differs greatly from the Western chromatic system. As you know, the Western 12-tone system has 12 pitches, each a semitone or semitone apart from one another. For example, the Turkish makam system involves 24 pitches that are quarter tone apart from one another. The notation of these extra pitches requires some accidentals we're not familiar with in the Western classical notation. You can see these accidentals on the screen. Let's hear a makam scale that doesn't involve microtones or anything. This is Zengüle makam. Sephardic songs possess some makam flavor, although not involving quarter tones or microtones. Some typical makam intervals, such as augmented seconds, jump out at you, as they are the intervals that give the songs a Middle Eastern flavor. In traditional Sephardic folk songs, we can expect to see and hear the following. Sephardic song repertoire is essentially vocal, although musical instruments were also used at times, especially on special occasions. When instruments were involved in the performances of these songs at family gatherings or at bigger occasions, the typical instruments used were percussion instruments such as tambourine, but also mandolin or oud, which are string instruments that belong to the lute family. Other percussion instruments used included castanets, finger cymbals, darbuka or dümbelek, and baraban. Another musical characteristic of this repertoire is compound rhythms used in complex rhythmic patterns. Rhythms such as 5/8, 7/8, or 9/8, for example, are very unusual in Western music. The traditional Sephardic folk songs incorporate a lot of improvisation as well. These songs were transmitted orally, and oral transmission encourages personal improvisation that often consists of lavish ornamentation and relatively free rhythm. Therefore, the melodies of the same Sephardic songs can differ tremendously from community to community or generation to generation. I would also like to point out that the texts of most of these songs were anonymous. In the Western classical arrangements of Sephardic folk songs, which I will play examples of later, the makam scales and intervals such as augmented seconds are incorporated into the music in a tonal compositional approach. The melodies are both modal and tonal, and both Western and non-Western in character. They sometimes have very complex rhythms. However, they generally exclude traditional instruments and dispose of the ornamentations. Let me quickly take a moment to explain why I keep referring to the repertoire today as Sephardic art songs. What makes an art song different than just a song or a folk song? Folk songs are usually sung unaccompanied or with a single instrument like a guitar or a dulcimer. They're learned by ear and rarely written down. They often change over time through oral transmission, and their composers are usually unknown. Traditional Sephardic songs fall into this category. Art songs, by contrast, come from the Western classical tradition, especially the German Lied. They are more formally structured and musically complex, intended for classically trained singers with piano or ensemble accompaniment. The music and text are written down and preserved, and they're not adapted through performance. So what is the story behind the emergence of Sephardic songs within the Western classical medium? The 19th century witnessed a nationalist movement in Europe that presented itself in various fields. This movement became quite evident in music as folklorists, music scholars, as well as some Western classical composers began to explore the folk literature of nations in search of national identities. So, folklore of many European nations was collected and transcribed in the late 19th and early 20th century. Although the focus of this pursuit was on non-Western music and literature, many Western classical composers were inspired by this material in expressing a national identity in their music. Western classical composers' interest in collecting and arranging Sephardic songs can also be traced back to this nationalist movement in music. In late 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century Russia, the young Jewish composers of the time got inspired by the nationalist movement in Russian music, exemplified by Russian composers, and they became attracted to the idea of representing a Jewish identity in music. And so they collected and transcribed perhaps thousands of Yiddish folk songs. A similar interest appeared in the Sephardic musical realm, pioneered by the Turkish composer and ethnomusicologist Alberto Hemsi. Hemsi not only contributed to these transcriptions with his own fieldwork, but he also arranged and harmonized about 60 of these songs with a Western classical approach. There were many others that showed interest in arranging these songs in the Western classical tradition. Over 45 composers, actually. And how did I find out about this? Here's my story. So I'm originally from Turkey, and I'm a member of the Sephardic Jewish community in Izmir, Turkey. That's my paternal grandfather there with his mother, aunts, siblings, and cousins. So naturally, I've always been interested in information related to Sephardim. And back in 2017, I stumbled upon the famous Spanish composer Joaquín Rodrigo's Cuatro Canciones Sefardís. This work of his is a set of 4 songs set to anonymous Ladino text, adapted by his wife, Victoria Kamhi. Through quick research, I found out that Victoria Kamhi was a Turkish pianist who was born into a Sephardic family in Istanbul. Then I was curious to see if there were other Western classical works inspired by traditional Sephardic folk songs, and I decided to go on a quest. Throughout my research, I found so many works that I had to create an Excel document to compile them under one roof. The list kept expanding, and eventually I decided to create a catalog out of my findings and publish it because I realized that no such information or catalog existed anywhere. And the catalog had continued to expand since then. Just a few words about who the composers are. For example, a name on the chronological list of Sephardic art song composers is Lucien Bernheim, a Swiss composer who published his 5 arrangements under the title Cinq chansons populaires judéo-espagnoles in 1920, which also happens to be one of the earliest works on my catalog. Sephardic music scholar Edwin Serussi maintains that Bernheim was introduced to the Sephardic culture through the Sephardic Jews he encountered in Paris, who were immigrants from Turkey and Greece that arrived in France after World War I. Bernheim learned these songs from Madame Judith Pichon, a Sephardic Jew from Izmir, my hometown. Almost each composer has a story about how they became a part of this genre, and I will quickly go over some slides with prominent composer names as I speak. Of course, I will not be able to talk about each composer on the catalog today. However, the catalog currently includes composers of various ethnic and religious backgrounds, from Turkey, Israel, Spain, Italy, Germany, France, Bulgaria, the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, and some other countries. Their names and works are listed on my website, and here's a QR code. You see it on the screen. This will take you to the catalog, to my website. As of today, there are over 45 classical composers who have arranged or composed over 360 vocal Sephardic works in the Western classical tradition for voice and various instruments, or over 360 art songs. You may also find all of this information and more in my recent article about Sephardic art song that was published in the March-April 2025 volume of the Journal of Singing. After finding so many Western classical Sephardic vocal works, I took the liberty of giving the genre the name Sephardic art song. Now let's listen to a Sephardic community member, an elderly woman, sing the traditional version of Ya Salió de la Mar, and then listen to excerpts of some art song arrangements of the same song. I will share my screen differently now over here. Okay, make sure I also share the sound. Yes, okay. Ya Salió de la Mar. It's actually a wedding song. It's about baño de novia. It's when the bride has to cleanse herself before the wedding. So here are some community members singing these songs.
La novia se va a ir al baño, la novia se va a ir al baño, el novio ya la está esperando, ya salió de la mar, el novio ya la está esperando, ya salió de la mar.
Here's another community member. Same song, but you will hear different words.
Ya salió de la mar la galana, ya salió de la mar la galana, con un vestido ali blanco, ya salió de la mar.
These two community members were from Thessaloniki, and now one from Rhodes.
Mi sposica sta nel bagno, mi sposica sta nel bagno, vestita di colorado, échate a la mar, échate a la mar y alcanza, échate a la mar. Si a la...
And here's one from Jerusalem.
Ya salió del mar la galana, ya salió de la mar. Ya salió de la mar la galana, ya salió de la mar.
You can hear some of the words are different, and even some of the melodies are different depending on the location and community. Okay, you can see the translation on the slide. Now let's listen to Alberto Hemsi's setting of it. For the sake of time, I'll move on to another example. The same song. Hold on, this is a setting by Manuel Garcia Morente, a living composer based in Barcelona.
If you're an illegal alien, this
sorry.
runway is your future because you're headed home.
Let's also hear Joaquin Culmel's version of the same song.
So right when I thought Mom would start taking it easy with her osteoporosis, boom, we moved to this cool new place.
Sorry, there's no way I can get rid of these ads, so sometimes you will have to hear 5 seconds of ad. I apologize about that. Melodies are similar, but the settings are quite different. Now let's listen to a few other excerpts of Sephardic art songs. Now, first let's listen to two different versions of the same Sephardic song named Avram Avinu, also known as Cuando el Rey Nimrod. This is the more popular version that you may be familiar with.
If you're an illegal alien, this runway is your future because you're headed home.
Cuando el rey Nimrod al campo salía, miraba en el cielo y en la estrella, vido luz santa en la judería, que había de nacer Abraham Avinu. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
This is one of the most popular Sephardic song, so most of you, I'm guessing, are familiar with it. So here is a Western classical setting of it by Manuel Garcia Morante. Right. Oops. Okay. Now, the next song is De las Altas Mares. Let's listen to, again, a more folk song-like version of it.
De las altas mares traen a la niña vestida de oro y de pelo fino.
Now let's listen to a setting, a Western classical setting of it by Roberto Sierra. Quite different. This is for voice and a chamber ensemble, obviously. And then there are also original compositions that are not simply arrangements of Sephardic folk songs. One example is by Sid Robinovich, a Canadian composer from Manitoba. So I figured since we're virtually in Canada today, I should give an example of a Canadian composer's work. A considerable number of Robinovich's works are based on world folklore, including programmatic pieces inspired by folk tales. He has arranged numerous Sephardic folk songs under the titles Canciones Sephardis and a Mosaic of Jewish folk songs, and has also contributed to the genre with his original composition, Rodas Recordada, for soprano, alto, baritone, clarinet, guitar, and cello. This beautiful chamber piece is a setting of a poem by Spanish literary historian and author Guillermo Díaz Plaja. Robinovich's delicate setting skillfully complements and enhances Díaz Plaja's prose. To share with you the story behind this touching poem, I would like to quote Tomás Ryan de Heredia, who has provided the notes about the poetry and the translations of the poetry in the musical score of this piece. He says, during the summer of 1933, a group of young Spanish scholars and writers decided to make an expedition to certain parts of the Mediterranean Sephardic communities in search of an ancient Hispanic folklore. One member at that group, the then 24-year-old Guillermo Díaz Plaja, was particularly successful in filling his notebook with romances on the island of Rhodes, where he made the acquaintance of a Sephardic lady who identified herself as Mazalto de Yako Israel. She recited the ballad of the three doves to him during a beautiful summer afternoon. Some 40 years later, after his first visit, Professor Don Guillermo Díaz Plaja, now a celebrated literary critic and member of the Royal Spanish Academy, returned to the Sephardic community where his literary career had been born. As he well knew, a tragic change had taken place. After the capitulation of Italy to the Allies in 1943, the Germans occupied Rhodes, and on July 23, 1944, shipped off to Auschwitz. 1,673 Jews who were living on the island. All but 151 perished. Don Guillermo tried to find again the house of Mazalto de Yako Israel in the Calle Ancha, the street running through the old Juderia, Jewry, now called Street of the Jewish Martyrs. He took out his notebook and instead of a romance, wrote a poem in prose of this, his own hauntingly interwoven with memories of his first visit and the ballad of the three doves. Upon reading about Díaz Plaja's poem and this story behind it, I found a personal connection to this piece that made it much more meaningful for me. My paternal grandfather's side of the family that you saw in the picture earlier is from Rhodes. Although the majority of the family had moved to Turkey long before the Second World War, two of my grandfather's aunts remained in Rhodes until Germans occupied Rhodes. They were sent to Auschwitz. My grandfather used to tell me this heartbreaking story when I was a kid, and the story of Mazalto de Yako Israel reminded me of it. And perhaps Mazalto de Yako Israel was my great aunt's. They were friends, and perhaps they shared their last moments together. I don't know. So I would like to play an excerpt from this beautiful piece, and I will try to also provide you with the lyrics and the translations so you can follow a little bit. It's a long piece, so I'm not going to be able to play the whole thing, but I invite you to listen to it because it is really beautiful. But I will play just an excerpt of it, maybe about 5 minutes.
Take the next step in treating your moderate to severe ulcerative colitis with Entyvio, the only gut
really a beautiful piece. So I do invite you to listen to it. It is long though, so that's why I will stop here for now. So to conclude, my research, lectures, and performances aim to raise awareness about a rich Sephardic repertoire within the Western classical medium, one that offers a window into the Sephardic culture and history. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Lori. That was fascinating. I can see why you're so passionate about this form of music and preserving your heritage and your roots in such a rich source.
Thank you.
And yeah, so we're grateful for all that work that you're doing. Several people have been asking about your catalog and whether they can access it. So I think you did include your barcode or whatever where people could reach it, but we'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered with the recording of this talk, as well as any links that you want to share. So
sure, sounds good.
Songs that you've shared today, we could include those links with what we email out to people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so while people are thinking about their questions, please use the Q&A box on the screen there. I wanted to ask you, how has your Jewish heritage influenced your connection to Sephardic art song, as well as your broader musical journey?
I mean, it's had a huge impact on the trajectory of my career, essentially, because when I started my doctorate in voice performance, Sephardic music was nowhere in my radar. I didn't, know that I would be so immersed in this genre and find so much great repertoire in this medium. So when I stumbled upon Joaquin Rodrigo's set, I got very excited. And the interesting thing is, I mean, I've only been in the United States for the past 13 years. So I came here for my master's and then stayed for my doctorate. So I'm away from home. All my family is back in Turkey. So having this kind of separation from home also creates this, I don't know, I feel extra connected with my Sephardic roots and family traditions. So when I saw that set of Sephardic songs, that just, excited me a lot. And then when I realized that there's more, I thought, okay, this has to be my dissertation. I have to perform these songs. I have to explore this. And I mean, not only this helped me in my career journey, but also, it was very meaningful to me. I sang these songs and felt more connected to my heritage, my family, my culture, my roots. So there's that aspect of it. And then whenever I perform it, also, I connect with people on a different level. Every time I have a performance, I have a recital, somebody in the audience will come to me and say, oh, my grandmother used to sing these songs to me. You just, took me back to, I don't know, my childhood. So that just creates this different kind of connection with my audiences as well. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, definitely. One person has asked, is there a genetic component to what music we like?
Oh, wow. That's a very, that's an interesting question. I don't know if there's a genetic component, but there is definitely a cultural component. I mean, what we grow up with, what we're exposed to, our cultural roots do kind of determine what we're drawn to. So there's a little bit of that. So I'm guessing yes would be the answer. I don't know if it's because of genetic roots, but it's probably more cultural and what we've been exposed to.
Right, yeah. There's a question, can you tell us more about the Izmir Jewish community today?
Sure. So the Jewish community in Turkey overall is very, very, very small. So the Turkish population right now is 80 million, 80. But this is the Turkish population. The Jewish population in Turkey is about 17,000, if that. So very, very small. And the majority is in Istanbul. The Izmir community is about 1,500 people. So very, very small community. But it's still active. There are multiple synagogues that are open and active. There's a very big one as well that's been open for, since I've known myself. Still there's weddings happening, bar mitzvahs, and all of that happening in that synagogue. So it is very active. It's an active community. People get together. And so it is small, but it's still there. And people speak Ladino. My grandmother, sadly, she passed 4 years ago, but she spoke Ladino, and she spoke with her friends. Her generation just spoke Ladino with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone's asking, are these songs performed very often? By whom and where? So where would people actually see a performance of this kind of music?
Yeah, so Sephardic music is actually generally very popular among the world music scene. So I'm not talking about the Western classical versions, but more folk song versions or more popular versions like Yasmin Levy. I'm sure you've heard of this name. She sings it in her concerts. So popular versions you can find all around. The Western classical versions, I think, are relatively new. There's more interest now over the past maybe 10 to 15 years. I hear albums, coming out with these composers' works. I'm certainly a big champion of this repertoire, so I perform it in my performances. So it's not widely performed, but I'm really trying to make people aware of the presence of this genre so that it can be performed more.
Wonderful. Well, this talk is going to help that, I think. I
hope
knew
so.
nothing about this music, and so it's quite fascinating. And it really, some of those recordings really gave me shivers. And
Oh, really?
yeah,
Mm.
it's beautiful. So there's a question. There's a great tradition of Ladino poems, and she's wondering, has anyone taken those and composed music to them?
I don't know any. I mean, I'm not aware of compositions as such. I know that Flori Jagoda, who kind of relatively recently passed, she wrote her own music and her own lyrics as well, and they were in Ladino. But I'm not aware of more contemporary works with Ladino poetry. I think it would be great if anybody is listening who's a composer, I do invite them to
Wonderful.
do that. Yeah.
Someone's asking, was that you singing the last piece?
No, but I do have a performance of it though. That wasn't me. It was the original recording. I wanted to share Sinovic's original recording, but I did sing that piece, and it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah. And this person says that her parents were Italian Jews, and they didn't speak Ladino, but did have a small vocabulary of words that combined Italian and Hebrew. And she's wondering if there were areas of Italy where Jews continued to speak Ladino.
I'm not sure about the Ladino language, but I know that there were a lot of Sephardic Jews that settled in Italy. In fact, I did my DNA test. I was curious, and the largest percentage of DNA I have is from Italy, mostly from which was interesting. And I know that my grandmother's uncle resided in Italy, and he spoke Ladino. So I'm sure there are communities, or there were, I'm sure still are, some communities that speak Ladino there.
Okay. People are wondering about how the Jewish community in Izmir is doing right now.
Oh, well, I mean, they're well. It's getting smaller and smaller because the younger generations are kind of leaving either for school or for other reasons, so it's getting smaller and smaller, sadly, the community. But as I said, they're still active. They're thriving in their own ways, and Izmir is beautiful, so they enjoy their lives there. If you have more specific questions about their lives, I'm happy to answer, because my entire family is there and I visit all the time, so I'm very connected.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
In your experience, how does Sephardic music express themes of resilience and survival across centuries of diaspora?
I think I can't speak for other religions or cultures, obviously, but in my experience, Judaism has this culture of connectedness within the family and community. So I think these songs reflect that, this idea of community and togetherness and supporting each other. And in some of the research articles that I've read about Sephardic music, they talk about how the vocal music resembles the Sephardic mother singing to her child. So there is just kind of air to it. And I think the reflection of this Sephardic mother figure and this idea of connectedness is it comes through in the music.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, lovely. Someone's curious about the meaning of your last name. And
That's a great question.
it's unusual and lovely, so they're just curious about.
Thank you. Well, it's a Turkish last name, so yes, it's Shen means joyful in Turkish. So what happened was when Turkey became a republic in early 20th century, there was this whole nationalist movement in Turkey where they wanted to Turkishify names. So the Muslim people did not have last names, but the Jewish people did. So my family last name actually is Al-Hadef. So I was supposed to be Gloria Al-Hadef. But because there was this nationalist movement and they wanted to Turkishify names, they changed some of the Jewish last names to make them Turkish. And apparently my family was a very joyful family, so that's what they found appropriate for the family. So my family name became Shen. It changed from Al-Hadef to Shen.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that question.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
What role do you think music plays in preserving Jewish cultural memory?
Oh, wow. That's I could talk hours about that actually, because I think any music does that, especially vocal music when, so it reflects melodies that are so visceral in some ways that connect to a culture of a community, but also the language. And then there's the stories. Whatever stories are being told are stories of that culture. So I think this is not just for the Jewish community, but any music you hear will reflect its people. So, of course, Jewish music, because it has some specific melodies, especially as a Jewish person, it's immediately like, oh, you feel the connection immediately. Oh, that's Jewish, or oh, that's familiar. So I think music is very powerful in that sense, in many ways.
Indeed, yeah. Have you encountered any particularly moving or inspiring stories within Sephardic traditions that have inspired you?
Well, I mean, the Rodos Recordada, the one I just shared with you at the end of the lecture, that was very meaningful to me. Because, well, initially, when I heard Cuando el Rey Nimrod or, Los Bilbilicos Adio Querida, these are very typical, Sephardic songs that I grew up with. I heard it as I was, when I was a kid. So when I heard these songs elsewhere, it immediately created this, emotional response. But Rodos Recordada, because of that connection that I found with my family, and when I read about what happened to these people in Rhodes, and then remembering my grandfather's story about his family, it just became very powerful for me. So whenever I hear that piece and read the poem and listen to the music, it's just it's very meaningful to me.
Now, there was something really, really moving about hearing the recordings of the 4 or 5 ordinary people who were seeing the folk traditions. Could you speak a little bit about that? Have you, traveled and met with people who sing those folk melodies?
I haven't, but so as I was saying at the beginning of the 20th century or late 19th century, early 20th century, people became interested in folk melodies and oral traditions. So these music scholars traveled everywhere, and they met with these elderly people in communities, and they had them sing or recite these oral, the literature, and transcribe everything. So these recordings are from those times when, people were traveling with their little recorders and trying to. So the people we heard probably have passed long ago. I don't think they're with us any longer. So these are very old recordings that inspired musicologists, ethnomusicologists who did these kinds of studies. So yeah, that's all I know about these recordings. And if you go to this website, I'm happy to share that website with you as well. It includes a lot of Sephardic songs and original recordings of elderly community members singing them. So it's not just for that particular song. We can find it for many.
Oh, it's wonderful to have that preserved all time. That's really great. Yeah. Huh. There's a question from someone who says they love the Hanukkah song about the candles.
Oh, that's Flori Jagoda.
Yes.
Ocho Candelicas.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So they're asking if there are other songs about Jewish holidays that are Ladino.
There are many. But Ocho Candelicas is very contemporary because Flori Jagoda wrote it. And so, she lived throughout the 20th century. So it was written probably in the 70s, 80s. I don't know when she wrote it, but she has other songs like that. So I would encourage you to listen to recordings of Trio Sephardi. I don't know if you're familiar with this ensemble. There are 3 musicians who were protégés of Flori Jagoda. So Flori Jagoda was their teacher, and they recorded many of her songs. I had the privilege of performing with them earlier this year twice. They're just so wonderful and beautiful arrangements of Flori Jagoda's songs. So many songs like that you can find in Trio Sephardi.
Right. There's another question. Is there a difference between Ladino and Judeo-Turkish?
Yes and no. I mean, when you go to Turkey and hear Jewish people speak Ladino, that's the Judeo-Turkish you probably would hear. So what happens is they sprinkle more Turkish words in the whole conversation. And I thought, because I would have this conversation with my grandmother a lot, and I would be like, oh, you think you speak Spanish. You don't speak Spanish. Half of what you're saying is in Turkish. And then she'd be like, well, it's easier right now. If I had to speak, I could speak. I don't have to use the Turkish words. And that's true. When she met a Spanish-speaking friend of mine, she was, I was wrong. She totally could communicate with her completely in Ladino without having to use any Turkish words. So it's kind of like for any bilingual person, it's just easier to come up with words from each language, and it's easier to communicate if it's possible to use both languages at the same time. So I think the Turkish Ladino is kind of that.
Yeah.
I
loved your story about Dr. Maimonides.
Oh yeah.
And the playfulness and humor. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, that's an example from Marie-Christine Varol's book, The Manual of Judeo-Spanish. So I got to meet her actually in Paris. She resides in Paris, and the Sephardic community in Paris meet every week to learn Ladino together, which is wonderful. So it was just an example from her book that I thought was hilarious, and
very funny.
I love sharing it with my audiences. and it's true. Like in my own personal experience has been that way too. There's a lot of wordplay in Ladino. When my grandparents spoke it, I could hear it. It's very difficult to explain because it's a lived experience. So it's like, it may not be as funny sometimes if I were to, give examples of it now, but it's definitely true.
Yeah. Can you think of another example?
Oh, God. That's hard to come up with on the spot, but if I find anything, I'll send it in an email so you can share it with participants.
Sounds good. Yeah, yeah. So there's another question. Can you tell us what your favorite Ladino song or poem might be?
That's a tough one. I have a lot of favorites, but I think my favorite is Adio Querida. It's just a beautiful, haunting piece, and yeah, a very popular Sephardic piece. So I would suggest everybody to listen to it. Adio Querida.
Yeah, and what do you love about it?
I think it's the melody that is so powerful, and I think it's partly the song itself, but it's partly what it seems to trigger among the audiences. Whenever I sing that song, people just react to it in a certain way, and they always want it as my encore piece. So that always tells me like, oh, okay, so
yes.
that's, you know, that does something to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is all the questions we have. So, Lori, I just want to thank you for sharing so openly and
Oh, my pleasure.
enthusiastically about your passion for this subject. And I think you know, opened up our ears and our eyes to a whole new tradition that we can all explore. And I'll look forward to sending some links to your resources that people can follow up with.
Sure.
But yes, you've been very, very engaging, and you did a great job of giving us
Oh, thank you.
this source of music. So now, before we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to invite everyone to our next lecture in our series, where we're going to be featuring Rabbi Deborah Sachs-Mintz. We're just thrilled to have contacted her and her willingness to speak on this really important topic of harnessing the potential of our comfort songs. So that will be on a Wednesday, not a Sunday. So please notice that it's not a typo. She was only available to speak on a Wednesday. So it'll be December the 3rd at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And sorry to those of you who had to wait for our talk today because of the time change. We appreciate you sticking with us. And Rabbi Sachs-Mintz is an educator, composer, vocalist, and multi-instrumentalist. If you haven't seen her, look her up on YouTube. She is just a brilliant, brilliant musician. And she's also a facilitator of Jewish communal music. And so she's going to explore how we use the internal strength that we get from singing our own anchor songs to serve our communities in times of profound disruption like what we're experiencing now. For Rabbi Sachs-Mintz, the power of communal music ignites spiritual creativity, fosters participation, and deepens connections within Jewish life. So I hope you will join us for this timely topic, even if you can't make it at that particular time. Do register, because we'll send out the recording as we're going to do today. Sam, if you could post the link to register in the chat, that would be great. And also, I want to thank our wonderful team of Building Bridges volunteers, Sam Margolis and Ann Petrie for all their assistance. And thanks to our board of directors and Rabbi Lynn for their support of this series of talks. And our gratitude, of course, goes to the Jewish Federation of Victoria and Vancouver Island for their generous funding. And I understand that many of you have already donated to Kolot Mayim when you registered for this talk, and we're grateful for that support. And Sam has posted a link to the donation page if you wish to help us build a vibrant community at Kolot Mayim. We're a small, humble synagogue, but making big waves in the world. And so we want to thank each of you for joining us today, and we appreciate you being here. Now I just want to offer our heartfelt appreciation to Dr. Lori Shen for the insights and inspiration she has so generously shared with us today. Lori, would you like to offer any final words before we sign off?
I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to share all of this with you today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. I'm going to close the meeting.